Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight for our special coverage of the Republican National Convention. I'm Brandis Friedman. GOP nominee for President Donald Trump is taking the stage on the final night of the convention in Milwaukee. It caps off 4 days of speeches from some of his biggest backers. Illinois Republicans cast doubt today on whether they'll unconditionally accept the results of this year's election. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from inside Milwaukee's Pfizer Forum with more. Amanda.
In the days after the 2020 election, Trump refuted the results. 4 years later, he still maintains without evidence that he won.
I'd like to provide the American people with an update on our efforts to protect the integrity of our very important 2020 election. If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
Which is why today I asked elected officials who are part of Illinois' delegation to the Republican National Convention about this year's election.
Will you accept the results of this election if your candidate loses?
Well, first of all, we've seen none of that at this convention, not anything related to what happened in the election in 2020. Everything has been focused on the future. Listen, is election integrity important? Yes, it is. In 2020, were there improprieties? Of course there were. People that shouldn't have voted, voted. Illegals that voted.
He's right that Trump surrogates have not made election denial a key part of the RNC. Perhaps that is because, despite numerous investigations, there is no proof of voting irregularities that impacted the results of that presidential contest, nor has there been evidence of widespread voter fraud in Illinois. Even so, the Illinois Republican Party is redoubling its election integrity efforts. Outgoing Chair Don Tracy says he's expanded the program from just before the election to year-round.
Used to be we had election day, now we have election season. It used to be we didn't have same-day registration, and now we do, and that creates chaos for the county clerks in Illinois who administer the election. It used to be that we stopped counting the ballots on election night, and we stopped receiving them. In Illinois now, they come in 14 days later.
Illinois gives those 2 weeks so that ballots have their time, ballots that have been mailed in, that is, have their time to work their way through the postal system. That can cause a delay in calling close contests. Now, Tracy's successor, Kathy Selvey, says that she is going to keep this up as a core principle of the Illinois Republican Party.
I am all about election integrity, and every single cheat should be discovered and uncovered and discounted, and every single legitimate vote should be counted.
I pressed her on whether she'll accept the results of this year's election, whatever those results may be. She brought up how all of these questions started with the race in 2000, Bush v. Gore and those hanging chads. And then she repeated,
What does it mean that it's not a simple yes or no?
Oh, I'm committed to election integrity, yes. How's that?
Meanwhile, Tracy says that, yes, the people of Illinois should have confidence in the integrity of Illinois' elections. Still, he says that the state needs stronger laws, like voter ID requirements.
And the only way to change it, the only way to get better election integrity rules, and so we can have more assurance, more confidence in fair and honest election, is to tighten up the voting rules in Illinois, and we can't do that until we win. So Republicans, conservatives, vote, and vote early.
Walking a tightrope there. Now, Illinois voters of any political stripe will have the opportunity to cast early votes in just a couple of months. Early voting begins in Illinois September 26th. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thanks. Of course, we'll see you a little bit later on in the program. But first, we check in with Nick Blumberg, who is outside Pfizer Forum, of course, in Milwaukee. Nick, Illinois has just 3 Republicans in its congressional delegation. Why are they optimistic about picking up more seats in November?
Well, to hear Congressman Darin LaHood tell it, he's one of those 3 Republicans, it comes down to 2 things. The energy around former President Donald Trump, especially in the wake of this past weekend's attempted assassination, and the disarray facing Democrats. Now, LaHood says sometimes Republicans on Capitol Hill don't feel like they get a fair shake from the media, but he told the Illinois delegation this morning that after President Joe Biden's debate performance, he had never seen Democrats so despondent.
Normally, when we're in D.C., the press is all over us as Republicans. They want to create controversy, find out what's going on in our conference. That week, there was nothing going on. I actually felt so sorry for a Democrat. I thought about hugging one that week. I didn't do it, but it's nice for a change that the table has been flipped.
Now, just a decade ago, Illinois had a Republican senator and 8 Republican members of the House. 10 years ago was also the last time that a Republican was elected to statewide office in Illinois. Heading into November's election, LaHood said the time is right for a comeback.
We have such a chance to turn around this country. We have the wind at our backs in terms of what we're doing. But it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to be engaged and use that energy and enthusiasm to win on November 5th. This is an opportunity for us to win back seats in Illinois. We only have 3 congressional members, and so I'm going to be working and doing everything I can to help get them elected.
But those GOP congressional challengers face entrenched incumbent Democrats. I spoke with Mark Rice, who's taking on Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. Rice told me he doesn't see it as an uphill battle, but a massive opportunity. He told me that his messages about crime, the economy, the border, those are getting through to voters. I also spoke with Jim Karras, who's taking on Congressman Brad Schneider. Karras said for him, it's about public service, and he thinks Republicans are energized heading into November.
Nick, the delegation heard from another challenger taking on a well-established incumbent. Tell us about that.
That's right. Bernie Moreno is a GOP candidate for U.S. Senate in Ohio, taking on longtime Senator Sherrod Brown there. He also struck an optimistic tone, and he said unity is key for Republicans. Moreno told the room that after he won a very hard-fought contested primary, he set himself to the task of bringing the party together for a common cause.
At the end of the day, while we agree with each other, whether it's 60% or 90%, it's a lot more than what we agree with Democrats on. This election isn't about tax rates. We want to lower those. It's not about regulation. We're going to lower that. This is about the direction of this country.
Moreno also got to dig in at the Windy City, telling any Chicago residents in the room that if they want to get away for a week during the Democratic National Convention next month, Ohio will welcome them with open arms. Brandis.
All right, Nick, thanks. I'm glad they've got a sense of humor. We'll see you a little bit later on. But first, Donald Trump is set to formally accept his 3rd GOP presidential nomination tonight. Trump has reportedly rewritten tonight's acceptance speech in the wake of Saturday's assassination attempt. It comes amid calls in the Republican Party to tone down divisive political rhetoric and call for unity. Joining us now with more on Trump's messaging tonight are Santita Jackson, a political commentator and host of the Santita Jackson radio show, and Eric Nisbet, a professor of policy analysis and communication at Northwestern University. Welcome back, Eric. Welcome, Santita. Thanks for joining us. So, Santita, I want to start with you, please, briefly. What do you think we can expect to hear from former President Trump tonight?
You know, I'm really looking at a man who trusts his own counsel. I don't expect men like him to really change up midstream. He might change his tone a little bit because he appears, at least visibly, to be contemplative in the wake of an assassination. You know, when you have a bullet whiz by your ear, it can be life-changing, but it can also make you hew more closely to what you believe. And so I don't really expect a different Donald Trump. I expect maybe someone who is maybe a little bit more thoughtful. I hope that he will use the tremendous charisma that he has to heal the nation. Unity, okay. I don't want uniformity, but unity. Someone who will use his power to bring people together. I hope that he does that.
Eric, we also know he's slated to speak for an hour and a half. Now, that could just be some padding time for all the applause they're expecting. Right. But what is it that he needs to say that's going to take an hour and a half?
That's a good question, right? It might be a bit of a pivot. I think he's trying to reintroduce himself to the American people. That's a lot of the personal stories, his granddaughter, his children. They're trying to soften his image, right? Their central message, I think, of this convention has been prosperity and peace through strength, right? And that is basically what they've been communicating. That's why he wants to communicate that he is strong. That's why they have sort of the co-branding tonight of basically the head of the UFC, right? And Hulk Hogan, a wrestler. So, you know, he is a strong man. He's healthy. He might, yes, moderate his tone, right? I don't think the substance is going to change necessarily, but he is trying to sort of move past the events of January 6th and say that I am a changed man. I am here. I am strong. Peace and prosperity is with me.
And Eric, he's moving into Castro territory. No one speaks for 90 minutes.
No one speaks for 90 minutes. Yeah. So, Santita, this is his third nomination. How is this Trump different from the candidate Trump we saw in 2016?
Well, he is not the same man that we knew in 2016. In 2016, he was a television star. He was a mogul. He has had his hands on the nuclear codes. He is a different person. You cannot have that kind of experience and be the same guy. You know, whenever people say to you, oh my goodness, you've not changed, well then you've not grown, and that's not a very good thing. So I hope that he has grown. I hope that he has enlarged. I hope that he will be the Donald Trump that many people have known in the past, someone who was inclusive. If you talk to Mike Tyson, you'll hear inclusiveness. When you talk to a lot of different people, you hear someone who broke the barriers at a country club and made sure that you had a black and a Jewish person admitted. I hope that we will get that guy, as opposed to someone who is diminishing people. I hope that he will lift people up.
Is that guy going to play to the base?
No, that's a lot to hope for. That's a lot of hope. That's not going to play the base. You know, it's been interesting. I think they've been trying to tone down a little bit, seem a little more moderate Republican Party. You know, the word abortion has not been mentioned like once. And yet, instead of it coming from Donald Trump, they're having other people sort of telegraph, even though we're a little more moderate, but we're still with the base. That's where, like Franklin Graham, from terms of the Christian evangelicals, is introducing him. And others, Tucker Carlson is on, you know, right, on sort of the white nationalist side of the party. So that is still there. That has not gone away. It's more the tone and maybe the association with Trump they're trying to change.
Yeah, they've definitely got, I want to get Amanda in here in just a second, but they've definitely got a fun lineup, so it'll be fun to watch this later on tonight. It is a television spectacle, isn't it? Yeah. You two aren't going anywhere, so thank you so much, because we're going to check back in with you in just a little bit. But I want to get Amanda Vinicky back in here. She's still in Milwaukee at the Pfizer Forum. She's joined by Illinois Congressman Republican Mike Bost. Amanda.
Yes, Mike Bost, who actually represents a third of the landmass of Illinois with his congressional district covering southern Illinois, because it's really so sparsely populated, is the reason that your district is so large. I want to begin, I talked earlier about election integrity. Can you say, what will it take for you to accept the results of this election, come what may?
Well, I'm going to accept the results of the election. And remember this, the Constitution is very, very clear. The state legislature must set the rules for election. What happened in the last election was the state legislature, several of them, did not set the election. A governor did based on COVID, or a board did not appointed by the state legislature.
But that's not the thrust of President Trump's arguments, was it?
But no, he believes there was fraud, which there was. But that's not an issue that needs to be cleared by the federal government. That falls under the state government, who operates and, according to the Constitution, should take care of those things. And if you don't think there's fraud, you know, we come from a state that's pretty well known for it at times.
Corruption, anyway.
So, fraud, corruption. We know, well, for instance, if you remember, but before I won this seat, Jason Plummer ran for it. And we had certain areas that were voting 115 and 115% of the registered voters. Now, that's not a math that works out correctly. So the State Board of Election had to go in and peer that. But not the federal government, but the state government.
So bringing this to the state is really where you're saying this has to be controlled. But
it's got to be for the states as long as they handle it under the Constitution.
You know, earlier this week, the focus of this has been about unity, and you did have a primary race, a really competitive one against former Republican nominee for governor Darin Bailey. He failed in that contest, then ran against you and really ran to the right, though you were known as a fairly conservative.
Right. Running against me from the right, and I said that the whole time. Running against me from the right that's a very, very, very thin rail. And we ended up winning, and now Darren Bailey and I have talked several times. We're talking regularly, but one thing we did talk about just a week or so ago, we actually talked before we came here and said, this is not about us. It is about the unity of the party. He and I are both delegates, and both of us stood shoulder to shoulder.
You're letting
to make
bygones
that
be
vote.
bygones.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
do you fear getting further challenges from him or from the right?
If they feel that I'm not doing something correctly, that's the part of the process, and that's the way the process works. And if someone wants to run, this is the great thing about our democracy. You can run.
Does this show that the federal government should take action to sort of level the playing field when it comes to redistricting? Again, as I noted, your district expanded.
Right. No, it does not. And the reason that it does not is still that same issue. The states should control the elections process, also the districting process. Now, there are certain guidelines that are in place. The district should be compact. That's really tough for us. And contiguous. We do that okay. And do not offset a minority majority district. In other words, if something can be an African-American district, you don't cut it up.
Mm-hmm. That's something that has left Illinois Democrats to say, we're not going to implement redistricting because they believe Republican states will gerrymander it. Got to leave it at that because I've got only 20 seconds left. What do you want to hear from President Trump tonight?
I think what we're here to President Trump tonight, dealing with the border, we'll deal with the inflation, we'll deal with energy independence, and also the power of making sure that our enemies fear us and our allies trust us. And I think you'll see a different tone of President from the fact that what we know of Donald Trump, because the fact that you are so near-death experience might change.
Does a different tone mean he's a different man?
I don't think so. I mean, a different tone is just the way he presents his issues.
Different tone is a different tone. Thank you once again to Congressman Mike Bost.
All right, Amanda, thank you. And of course to Representative Mike Bost as well. We'll see you in a bit. And we're back in a moment with more from the Republican National Convention and of course our entire Spotlight Politics team. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Illinois delegates on their expectations for Donald Trump's speech tonight, Joe Biden and the Democrats, and a look ahead to the rest of the final night of the Republican National Convention. Joining us once again from Milwaukee are Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Nick Blumberg. And of course, joining us here in studio, political commentator Santita Jackson and Northwestern University professor Eric Nisbet. Welcome back, everybody. Nick, let's start with you first, please. You know, we just heard from Congressman Mike Bost. All eyes are on Donald Trump tonight. You also spoke with Illinois delegates about what they expect to hear from the former president in his speech tonight. What'd they tell you?
Well, we've heard all week expressions of gratitude from the delegation saying that they think God saved President Trump's life during that assassination attempt. We've got some video of that whole delegation gathered on the floor earlier this week when they officially pledged their votes to nominate Trump. So I think a lot of folks are hoping to hear some of that from Trump himself. They think something like this, a brush with death, might make the former president more reflective. We've heard a lot of the word unity. One of the delegates told me he thinks maybe we'll see a more grandfatherly side of Trump. Of course, that'll come, with the backdrop of what we've been seeing on the floor all week. Folks in the audience at the Fiserv Forum here breaking out in regular chants of fight, 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 echoing the president's own words. So whether we hear from Trump the unifier or Trump the fighter, or perhaps a bit of both, we will find out very soon.
And of course, it helps that we did, in fact, hear from his granddaughter, his eldest granddaughter, just last night. Heather, Democrats continued to campaign against Trump in Milwaukee by focusing on Project 2025, but don't seem to be breaking through. Why not?
They are not breaking through. There's a lot going on in Milwaukee for the Republicans. You can see behind me the energy and sort of the excitement. And unfortunately, in the Democrats' mind, they've been besieged with questions about President Joe Biden's future on the ticket. Quentin Folks, who Illinois residents probably best know as the campaign director for former Governor J.B. Pritzker's reelection campaign, he's helping to run the Biden campaign. And and he sounded frustrated this morning when he wanted to talk about Project 2025 and sort of how the impact it would have on people's pocketbooks if those policies were implemented during a second Trump term. He could barely get the reporters in the room to focus. Everybody wanted to know whether Biden was considering stepping down and what sort of time frame that would be looking at. By the end of it, he was grateful to get a question about the substance of Project 2025, but that's not what the reporters were interested in talking to him about.
Amanda, you spoke with Illinois Republicans about the turmoil that seems to be engulfing the Democrats. How are they reacting?
Well, they're positively gleeful over it. They say that after so many years of the media focusing on Republican infighting and dysfunction, that they're happy to have Democrats take their turn. And as one congressman put it, it seems as if the opposite party is in literal free fall. We reporters also asked them, all right, so if it isn't President Biden, who do you think it might be? And who would you rather have President Trump run against? Let's take a listen to the answer that state's representative, that is John Cabello, gave.
I don't think President Trump really cares who the next nominee is if it's not Joe Biden. I think you see right now that the country is ready for the change back to President Trump. I think he wins in a landslide no matter who it is.
Now, of course, there are oft-mentioned names, including Governor J.B. Pritzker. Congressman LaHood weighed in on that. He said that he thinks that outside of the Illinois media bubble, Pritzker doesn't often get mentioned, and that he believes, in fact, that Pritzker wouldn't be serving as an elected official at all were it not for his very, very wealthy inheritance.
Santita Jackson, we just heard from Mr. Cabello there. Do you think Trump and the Republicans are seeing this, potential turmoil in the Democratic Party and this uncertainty about Biden? And are they using that to appeal to voters who might be unsure?
Yeah, I think that the Democratic base is solid, even as we are dealing with this issue that we're dealing with right now. At the end of the day, the question is, are we going to be a democracy or are we going to be an oligarchy? You can't have 14 million votes, 86% of the delegates, and then have some wealthy donors threaten you with expulsion. It doesn't work that way. And I think that the Democrats will be buying much, much more trouble if they overthrow President Biden without his permission. You've got to, this is his decision and his decision alone. And once he does that, I think that things will smooth out if people feel that it's been an easy transition. I think that when you have a coup, that becomes the problem.
Eric Nesbitt, you mentioned this a little bit earlier. Tonight's speaker lineup, we've got Tucker Carlson, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, but also Hulk Hogan. Right. In addition to some of the everyday Americans, so-called everyday Americans that we've been hearing from all week. What do you make of this lineup?
So campaigns, when I teach my students, are about two things: contrast and certainty, right? And you have this on display. This is textbook, right? There is contrast. You have a person who just survived an assassination attempt. He's healthy, he's strong, he's been there every day showing himself, right? And you have a very united Republican Party. In contrast, you have the Democrats, disunited, bickering about who might actually lead them, serious concerns about the health and capability of their top candidate, both among Democrats and just the general public and the media. That is quite a contrast. And then there's certainty, right? You know what Donald Trump stands for. You know that he will be in charge. You know what his platform is. There is uncertainty even who will be the Democratic nominee and that was a mantra they repeated during the convention: who is in charge, right? They were talking about that last night. So this is the contrast, and so it's been a very effective week for RNC.
So, Nick, I want to come back to you because all week RNC fashion has been playing a major role. Obviously, folks loving to showcase their support for Donald Trump in various ways, including those in the Illinois delegation. Tell us about that.
That's right. You see a lot of interesting fashion and accessory choices at an event like this, but there's a particularly unusual one that popped up among the Illinois delegation. Let's take a listen.
ear bandages to show solidarity for President Trump. And some people are wearing gauze. I think that's kind of like mocking his injury. This kind of, to me, rises above. It's the American flag, and it covers the ear just like maybe divine intervention covered President Trump when he got shot.
So these badge of honor ear tags were made by a company in McHenry County, and they worked quickly. I checked the Internet Archive of their website from 2 days ago, and it was not on the front page. It's up on the front page for sale now. They say a portion of the proceeds will go to charity, to be determined, it says. But you know, the gauze, the bandages started popping up on folks just as soon as they saw President Trump on Monday night. But now, where they once were white, now they are red, white, and blue.
All right, an ear bandage. Thanks, everybody in Milwaukee. Of course, we'll see you again at 10. And thanks to our studio guests, Santita Jackson and Eric Nisbet. And that is our show for now. Be sure to join us for more live convention coverage tonight at 10 as we break down the fourth and final day of the Republican National Convention. In the meantime, be sure to check out our website for a live blog covering the very latest from the convention. That's, of course, at WTTW.com/news. And stay right here now for coverage from the PBS NewsHour. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. We'll see you at 10.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its founder and senior partner, Robert Clifford, who ranked #1 in the state of Illinois by Super Lawyers Top 10 2024 Illinois Super Lawyers List.